Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Leadership Voyage, the podcast dedicated to your pursuit of becoming a great leader. My name is Jason Wick, and I have a question for you today. Would you like a free book? That's the question. Now, you might say, maybe, depends on the book. So, my guest today is Jim Carlough, a seasoned leader who wrote a book called The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership. I read the book myself. It's a good read. It's got some very pragmatic information as far as tips are concerned for developing your skills, specifically around integrity and empathy, which is what we talk about today. But there are 6 pillars. And so I ask you if you'd like a free copy of this book, a hard copy signed by the author. If you would, it's not going to be that difficult to get one. Listen to the interview today and comment on the episode. Let us know what you thought. Don't tell me your address yet. Just in the comment that's public, just say something you thought about the episode. Honest feedback. Good, bad, or otherwise. We appreciate all of it. And then I will reach out to you individually, get your mailing address, and Jim will sign a copy of his book and send it to you for free. That's it. There's no catch. Just giving you a free book. Everybody loves to stack their bookshelf with leadership books, right? The more leadership books on your bookshelf, the smarter your friends think you are. Isn't this a truism? So let's do it. Let's get Jim to give away 3 books. Okay, so now you know what we're talking about today. If you want to get in touch with me about any other topic, you can email me at startyourvoyage@gmail.com. Otherwise, I want to hear from you about this episode in the comments of wherever you are listening, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, whatever it happens to be. Let me know. Or you can hit me with a message on LinkedIn. That works too. So today we talk about integrity and empathy most specifically, but there's a whole bunch of great storytelling weaved in and out of this episode. And I think you're going to enjoy it. Jim's an engaging guy. He's been in the workforce for a long time. He's led a lot of people. And he was compelled to write this book, The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership. He's considering writing a second, which is part of why he wants to hear from you. So have a listen, enjoy, learn a little bit, get a free book. Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us again for another episode of Leadership Voyage. I am thrilled to be with Jim Carlough today. Jim, it is nice to meet you. Well, not in person, but you know what I mean.
Jason, it's nice to meet you as well. I'm glad to be here today. It's a beautiful day in Dallas, and I see sunshine out your window, so it can't be all that bad.
No, it's looking good here in Colorado as well. And we got caught up and acquainted a little bit here before we started. So thanks for coming in today. Again, really appreciate it. And I'm excited about the topic we've got, which is about your book, 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership. And we're going to dig into that a little bit. But I want to jump in right away with a question that has been debated for centuries. Is a leader born or made?
A leader is made. So, and probably I'll have a scientist someday start to argue with me because they have identified a gene that a lot of people who end up in leadership have. However, I'm a perfect example of someone who wasn't born a leader. I didn't have a father or mother, and so I had a father or mother. I didn't have anyone in my family that was a CEO of an organization or a governor or a senator or anything of that nature. But not that governors and senators all have leadership skill, but we won't go there. So I'm a perfect example of that. In fact, I was having a conversation a few weeks ago, and in the conversation we were talking about, where in the various parts of my journey I picked up each of my pillars or trait or characteristics. And I started to think about my first management job, and I realized how bad of a manager I truly was.
Hmm.
Nobody, most companies do the following. You're a great employee, you show up, you do a great job, we're going to make you a manager.
Hmm.
They throw you into that position. They don't give you any guidance. You have a business degree. They didn't teach you about people and behaviors. And then you struggle. And I struggled. And I actually sat in this discussion and said, I think I need to find all of those people and apologize to them because the way I lead today is different than it was 15 years ago and different than it was 30 years ago. And so, and you also have to evolve your leadership skill as the environment changes and as generations change and the world that we live in change. I'm emphatic with the fact that your father may have been a CEO, your mother may have been chairman of the board, but you learned from them and others the way you manage.
Thanks for that description, Jim. No, that's a great one. And I also appreciate you sharing some of your personal experiences. It's funny you bring up your early management because I posted something on LinkedIn a couple months ago about my first management experience, which essentially involved, I think, screaming at somebody. So, we all can look back and find the humility. So I do appreciate you sharing that. I want to ask you about kind of the catalyst for you choosing to write a book. I think it was 2024, right? You wrote the book. And is it basically what you just said in your explanation that inspired you to write the book, or is there more to it?
I think there's a little bit more to it. It started out of the fact that for the last 25 years, 25 years ago, I worked for a company that had an internal mentor program. And I started mentoring younger individuals who wanted to get into management and then just continued doing that. And in that process, I learned that a lot of things that I was doing as a leader, they had never heard of in terms of understanding empathy or compassion. And I could see that in their face. They were struggling with when an employee had a problem, how to handle it and how to have that conversation. And so over the years, I kept evolving this as I mentored more and more people. And about 2 years ago, I finally said, well, it was actually during COVID. I stopped watching the news.
Hmm.
And I stopped watching the news because I lost faith in whether people were giving me the truth or not. And and I'll go back to my college days. There was a class I had in college. It was called Contemporary Moral Values.
Hmm.
And there was no textbook, but you had to bring either the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or the Washington Post to class. And if you were called upon, you had to take an article from the main section and present to the class the religious and political background of the writer
Hmm.
and what were they trying to convince you to believe in. Now,
Wow.
if you're thinking today's terms, you're probably saying, okay, I can understand that. But I graduated college in 1983.
Right.
There was no internet.
No.
You couldn't go and Google Jim Carlough, is he a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent?
Exactly.
And now you can do that today. But what I found was I found that I couldn't really understand why someone who I thought was a certain type of political background person was trying to convince me of something that was the polar opposite.
Hmm.
And I literally stopped watching the news.
Hmm.
And then as we came out of COVID, I really started to get the sense of the lack of integrity, not just in this country, but around the world of some of our leaders. And and I said, you know, I think it's time I put my stuff on paper.
Hmm.
And that's really what started the process. Because when I looked at it, I said, hell, I do a lot of writing. I can write a book. It was a lot harder than I ever imagined, but I enjoyed it. It was very enjoyable to go through. And I had a list of about 15 to 18 actually pillars. And I said, you can't give that to somebody and say, here, implement that. They'd look at that and go, no. So I wanted to get something down that was implementable, reasonable, and would have the biggest impact on the leader.
That's perfect. And first of all, beautiful response, Jim. So thank you. There's a lot in there. I look forward to myself to listening to this interview again so I can kind of unpack a lot of that. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in a way, it almost sounds like the first part of writing this book is almost a little bit of catharsis, and like you're kind of reconciling what you've seen, and then you have to put it down what you believe in. This is really important to like state what matters to you, right? And I mean, I have to respect that. I also respect the editing process of going from 15 to 6. So nice job on that. It makes it a digestible book, which for everyone out there, I've read it. It's a very good book. Digestible. I read it in a couple of days off and on. So definitely want to recommend it. Um, you touched on something that's pretty powerful there, which is kind of the trust and reliability of the sources and the leaders and the people that we hear from. And in the book, you have these 6 pillars. And as you and I were emailing back and forth, uh, you were pretty passionate about empathy, and that's what we want to dive into today. However, you said nothing exists without integrity. And we're going to dive into integrity first here. So you say integrity is the foundation, um, and you share an anecdote about when you were elected to the city council, I think it is, and
Correct.
you had and was that in New Jersey?
That was in New
That
Jersey.
was in New Jersey. And you had a conversation with the borough administrator. And real quick, I want to zoom out 2 very quick things for listeners. For those of you in the Northeast, you'll be like, why is he even bothering saying this? But a borough, like the 5 boroughs of New York City, right? It's like a local government thing, which a lot of people not in that part of the country probably don't hear the term very often. So that's what we're talking about, the context. You're in the city council talking to a borough administrator. And then secondly, I just can't resist this because when I read the book, I thought of it. You said you went to Seton Hall in South Orange. My family comes from Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey, which is just within a couple hours. And my great aunt was actually, I believe, the first female borough administrator in Bergen County in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey. So I have to say that
Wow.
she's long departed now, but I had to say that out loud. So now that I've set the backdrop of kind of like the environment we're talking about, could you please share the story for us? And it illustrates integrity.
So Don asked me to come and sit down, and as we were chatting, he said, I have a favor to ask of you." And being new to politics, and somebody saying favor, I'm thinking,
Boy.
what am I getting myself into? And it was not that at all. And what he said really hit me like a 2x4 to this side of the head. And he said, what I would like for you to do for me is every night when you go to bed and you put your head on the pillow, I want you to ask yourself one question. And that question is, did I do anything today for my own personal benefit that was at the expense of another person, group of people, or organization? If you can say no to that question, you have had a successful day and you can rest peacefully. But then he said, if you say yes to that question, you need to think and reevaluate what you did so you don't repeat it. Ever since that day in 1984, I have asked myself that question every night. I don't ever believe I answered that question yes.
Hmm.
And I think the result of that is the ability for me to build teams that believe in me and trust in me, know that I have their back, and that they know that the compassion and the empathy is real.
Hmm.
If you don't have integrity with your team, you won't have trust, you won't have commitment, they'll not stay focused, and those leaders are more likely to have higher turnover than those who lead with integrity. So in my book, since you read it, I don't profess myself to be an expert, but what I give people is an outline of the pillar, a story, but then I also give them references to people in real life that they may know or recognize their name who exemplify that characteristic in their leadership style. And then I also give people ideas for ways of how to implement it in their own life. So that's I kind of snuck that in there and I apologize for that, but I think it's important for people to understand they're not going to get a book with just Jim Carlough pontificating.
Right.
They're going to get a book that they're going to have other references. So, for example, in the book, I have a couple of references for integrity, but one in which is Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. And when he went into Microsoft or was hired in 2014, he made it very, very clear that the number one thing that they were all going to be held accountable for was their integrity.
Hmm.
And he has led that way ever since then.
Yeah, great story with Don, right? That was the name of the administrator. And I love the idea here that by asking yourself a question every night, you're implementing a repeatable system that gives you the opportunity of holding yourself accountable, staying on track, and just kind of cementing this integrity value, this pillar for you as a leader into your daily routine. I think that's a fantastic thing to hear about and for people to model. I also wanted to touch on you sharing the examples of folks out in the world that we've all heard of, and this is one where I think it can get a really real life discussion about this. I like this because I talked to Robert Hargrove last year, the co-director of the Harvard Leadership Project, excuse me, Harvard Leadership Project, and he told me that he tends to only use historical figures as leadership examples because CEOs fall from grace so quickly, right? So in your book, it's great. We have those references to others. It's not just Jim pontificating, which is wonderful. But I was wondering, right? It doesn't mean there's not integrity at Microsoft, but we're recording this in May. Just I think a week or two ago, they have this big layoff. It doesn't mean that there's not integrity, but it's interesting data points. And I'm curious because I had the really interesting fortune of looking through your ebook version, right? Where the editor is you and the editor kind of talking, which is just really cool to see. It's like, should we talk about this or that? And so I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on using CEOs in the current world as models.
It wasn't that I wanted them to be role models, but
Mm,
I wanted people to be able to connect with real life people that are doing those things today so that they're common in the press and easy to find,
great point.
right? Um, I also have Nelson Mandela referenced in the book,
Yes.
and a few others, but I truly wanted to make it easy for people to understand and connect the dots. And I don't know if Satya Nadella has ever written a book, but there's enough out on the internet and about his leading with integrity that people could go to the internet and make that connection. So it was a deliberate, it wasn't to highlight the CEOs, but it really was more to make it easy for people to connect to who these people are.
Yeah, great. No, I love that. That's a great response. And yeah, I love it. And I think people are people, right? We're all fallible to the point. So there is
Absolutely.
no perfect role model for us to follow. And I love you making that distinction of reference points that people can look at. That's wonderful. So if we're looking to build our integrity muscle, what are one or two different things you could say we could do to work on that?
I think the first thing to do, the first mistake most new leaders make is the first time they're introduced to their team, they start talking. And that's the worst thing to do. The first thing you need to do is go in and say hello and listen. The first thing. If you come in and just start saying, okay, here's how we're going to do things starting tomorrow, you're going to lose them all. because the first thing they want to understand is who you are, what you're about, and that's going to come from active listening first. And I also talk about in the book journaling. It's also important for your team to not just hear what you're saying, but see that you're listening by taking notes and writing. I literally worked for a person at one point in my career who we had a weekly one-on-one. And during that one-on-one meeting, he would read the Wall Street Journal.
What?
I am not kidding. He would have it in front of him. I would be in a chair. I would be talking. He would be responding. And he was dual tasking. It was the most
Wow.
painful exercise I ever endured because I felt like I wasn't important.
Yeah, invisible. Jeez.
And I don't do that. If In fact, I have two types of meetings. Once a week I have a team meeting with all of my leaders, and then once a week I get a one-on-one meeting with each of those leaders.
Hmm.
That one-on-one meeting is their meeting.
Hmm.
It is their opportunity to come and bring me questions, things they're struggling with, areas I can help them with. We talk about how their kids are doing or whatever, but it's their meeting and their agenda and their opportunity to get from me not what they're not getting, but what they need at that moment to help move the ball forward.
Yeah, I love those tips. First of all, sorry to hear about that experience. My goodness, that sounds horrible. And it's just struck me as you're talking about that in remote environments or hybrid environments, I mean, gosh, you can't even necessarily, well, you probably can tell, but you can't know for sure what people are doing when they're in a meeting anyway, right? They're looking at another monitor, reading the Wall Street Journal digitally. But I will say those are really nice tips. So as a leader, you're going to go in. If you want to build your integrity muscle, start from saying hello and listening rather than just going off and talking. Second, journaling, and I like journaling as it also relates back to what you said about the nightly question, forces that reflection and your own handwriting. You can see what's going on with what you've been experiencing, and taking notes. Using these one-on-ones, they're for your employee. We've talked about that a lot on this show. That fits in beautifully. The one-on-one, what do they need from you if you are the leader? Three great things there to mention, Jim. I want to shift to one of your other pillars, and this one is empathy. I'm going to pull up the manuscript here. Okay, yes, chapter 6, empathy. This quote from Oprah I wanted to read to everybody. Leadership is about empathy. It's about having the ability to relate to and connect with people for the purpose of inspiring and empowering their lives. I love this quote. So thank you for including it. I think it fits perfectly into your response to the including things from visible folks out there in the world today. And as I think about it, I also think about some of the realities that have been emerging around people-centric things in businesses, specifically here in like the Q1, Q2 timeframe of 2025, where 92% of HR leaders are saying that their people-centric initiatives are facing pushback. And I think about empathy, and I think about your thesis of leaders are made and they need to be able to invest in building their skills, right? And I think about this and I go, okay, Jim, what's your business case for empathy?
If I can't, so there, one of the other pillars is also compassion, but I separate the two of them. They are different. To me, empathy is the ability for me to put myself in the shoes of that employee and not just understand what they're going through, but to be able to help them solve that. Compassion, you can't always solve something, but you can give direction. And so, and I like to tell stories. So I had a situation, and it's in the book. You've read the book. where I was faced with downsizing a department of 25 over a period of 3 years. They were, this was back in the late 90s. It was green screen technology. And we were sunsetting it because we're replacing it with two different versions of a Windows-based product. The implementations would typically take 8 to 12 or 14 months, so some length of time. But my challenge was I needed those people to not walk out the door because we had customers to support.
Mm.
And I said, what am I going to do to let them know that I've got their back, I need them, and that we're in this together? And I didn't have an answer. I truly didn't have an answer. And I wrestled with this. And I finally came up with three things. So I met with the group as a team. I told them that we would be downsizing the product or sunsetting the product, and that in that process, their jobs would be going away. But I said, I'm going to make three commitments to you. Commitment number one, you will have as much notice as I have or as we feasibly have together to know when your last day would be. Knowing that these implementations take 6 to 12 months, you might have 6 to 12 months of a runway to find your next job. So that was commitment number one. Commitment number two, since the Windows technology was different than the green screen technology, if you wanted to stay in your position but work with the new products, I, during the workday, would provide the expertise to you by bringing in smarter people than me to learn how to work within that environment of those Windows capabilities that we were developing. Wouldn't be on overtime, or it wouldn't be after hours. It would be during the workday. I also said, if you don't want to stay in that position, but you want to stay in the company, I will help you find a job commensurate with what you get paid today in a role and a department where you can excel at. And I will make sure that I'm involved in getting you an introduction to the leaders in that area. And I went one step further. I then said, if you decide you don't want to stay with the company, I will not try to talk you out of it, but I will offer to help you find a job external to our organization that you can be successful at and succeed at. And I will try my best to talk to any influencer I can at that organization to help get you hired. My sole goal was to not have people leave and leave me left holding the bag, trying to support customers with nobody left. I succeeded. Nobody quit before their time.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And greater than 90% of the people stayed with the company. But something else happened that I never expected. A few months into this process, we had an annual employee satisfaction survey. And a couple of weeks after the survey, I get a call from an HR leader who asked to come and speak with me. And I said, okay. And so she came to my office and she had a stack of papers and she said, I want to talk about the employee satisfaction review of your people. I said, of all my people? And she said, no, just the people that are in Oakland. And that most of these people were in Oakland, California. And I went, oh, I'm thinking, this is bad, right? This is just bad. I said, well, you understand those people are losing their jobs, right? And she said, yes, but that's not what I want to talk about. I said, well, what do you want to talk about? She said, I really want to know what you're doing because they have the highest employee satisfaction rating in the entire company.
Yeah, that's insane considering the circumstances you're talking about.
Correct. But what it showed was I demonstrated that I could put myself in their shoes. And I felt if somebody told me my job was going away, what would I want? Time to think of something else to do. assistance, and then also support in helping me get that job or education or whatever. And I gave that to them in that commitment. And 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 that gave me not just what I needed to succeed, but it also was a reflection in the organization that said, "Hey, I've got my boss's back. He's taking care of me. Yeah, he understands my job's going away. He wants to educate me so I can stay with the company or help me get a job." And you know what? They were motivated.
Yeah.
They were motivated.
It's a fantastic story, Jim, and I know that from some of the stuff I had been looking up before, I really get the vibe that you like to tell this story, right? And you should, it's really cool to hear someone handle something that's so challenging so thoughtfully. And I do think this is an example of using, kind of sounds like you're saying the golden rule in a way, right? Like, what would I want somebody to do for me in this situation? And then you are identifying the best you can for a large group of 25 people, how you can make this situation work for them. And amazing that I think you just said 90% of the people stuck around either through the new technology or finding a similar role. And that makes me think about you got to that point somehow. Once again, beating a dead horse, leaders are made. So how do people develop empathy? That sounds like a challenging thing.
It is very challenging. And I think also understanding compassion and how to react. I think what we're most afraid of as humans is to say the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And in both of those situations, the important thing is, again, to listen and then, potentially to think before you respond. But it's also helps build that bridge. And I think it humanizes the manager. Someone asked me one time, so when does leadership start? Doesn't it start once you get your cup of coffee and sit down at your desk? And I said, no, it starts when your feet hit the floor in the morning. And it doesn't end until you go to sleep at night. It's 24/7. And, whether you socialize with your people or not, you're not going to ignore them if you pass them in the mall.
Right.
Right? You're going to greet them, you're going to talk to them, and they're going to look up to you and they're going to introduce you as, hey, this is my leader, or this is who I work with, or this is what, whoever. And to me, that is so important. I, when I first started in 1983 in management, right out of school, management was very authoritarian. This is what you're going to do. These three things are on your task list for tomorrow. And then I want to see it by 4 o'clock. That's not today. That is absolutely not today. And I hope to think I'd never behaved that way, even in 1983. But that's why it's really a learned thing, because you're not born to be compassionate. You're not born to have empathy. You do learn that in most families, or you'll learn that through experiences. But you have to really think about, what is empathy and where have I seen it? When you can start to realize where you've seen that being shown, you can start to catch on to say, okay, that's empathy. That's what they were telling me in that book. Okay, I get that. Or that was compassion. And so it's very hard. There were actually, when I worked at Pro Systems, we all took this class called, I think it was Pro Systems, Crucial Conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a book, and the woman who wrote the book came and lectured to all the management people. And it's, you have to be prepared for those difficult or crucial discussions, whether it's about talking about the employee's performance, or the employee talking about the fact that Aunt Ethel just got cancer and she's your favorite aunt, and you're an emotional wreck sitting there in the office. And what do you do? And many people just struggle with that.
Yeah, it's a nuanced topic, and thank you for getting into that in I would say in a gentle and realistic way, as far as the way you're talking about empathy and learning from seeing and things like this. And we're going to get into this in just a second, because everybody out there, you may have a chance to get this book for free. We'll see if Jim is okay with that. Haha. But there is more in this book about developing empathy that you can read about, and some other activities that you can try out. So sit tight for that. But before we do that, Jim, we will let people know about the book, and maybe an opportunity to get a signed version for free if you're okay with that. I ask everybody on this show the same question at the end. And that question is, what is something that you've learned recently?
Something that I learned recently is something that I've started to tell people, and it's more because of the environment that we're in.
Mm.
People need to hear it's going to be okay.
Mm.
There's a lot of noise everywhere within the United States, outside of the United States. A lot of things are confusing for people. You hear one thing said on Monday that's changed on Tuesday. I, my message is it's going to be okay.
Mm.
It's just going to be okay. We're going to be able to get up tomorrow. We're going to be able to get up next Monday. It's going to be okay. And I've said this to my kids recently as well, and they're all grown adults.
Mm.
And I'm like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Some days are harder than others. Some days are easier than others, but you're right. We'll be there at the end, still kicking, right? I do appreciate that.
That's correct.
That's a great insight. Okay, so when we before the call, you said you had a pretty cool offer for about this book. You want to let people know about that?
Yes, I would love to get feedback on what you liked or what you didn't like about this conversation. And I want to give away 3 signed copies of my book to the first 3 people that comment on Jason's podcast on either his podcast forum or his website. So you're going to be just logging a comment, how you feel about it. You listen to the episode, and then Jason's going to reach out to you to get your mailing address. Do not put your mailing address in social media. Please don't do that. That's not what we're trying to get at. But what we do want to do is get feedback. I am considering the next book. I am considering what's next on the journey. But if I'm not resonating with people, I do want to know that. So I'm thick-skinned and I can handle it. I handled 3 editors for the course of a year in writing a book. And if you haven't written a book, they like to change every word. So anyway,
There you go.
but for the first 3 people, I will gladly offer you a signed copy of my book, which I happen to have right here. And if you're not one of the lucky ones, it is available at Barnes & Noble online as well as on Amazon. Or you can also get it directly from me through my website, which is www.jimcarlough.com. So Carlough is Carlough, and Jim put in front of that, and then .com. You can read a little bit more about me on my website. There's other material there, and there'll also be a link to this broadcast as well.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Jim. And for all you listeners out there, a great opportunity to get a free signed book, and 5-star rated, I have heard from through the grapevine just recently. So, Jim, wonderful news. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today, Jim. I think everybody's going to get a lot of helpful information, and a few folks are going to get a free book out of the deal. So thanks so much for sparing some time. It's really nice to meet you and talk to you today.
Well, thank you for having me here. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much, Jason.
All right, everybody. Does anybody want a free book? As I asked in the beginning, comment on the episode wherever you've been listening, and let us know what you thought about some of the material. Something you agreed with, something you disagreed with, a question that you wish was asked, something like that. We'd love to hear you engage, and then I will reach out to you directly and give you or get your address, send it on to Jim, and you can get a free copy of the 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership, a free signed copy. But let's get to the episode recap. So leadership we could just kind of talk more generally to start things off and writing the book. Even though there's a gene, apparently, that some researchers have found where people have a tendency to become leaders, Jim is very adamant that leaders are made, not born. He wrote a book because managers aren't given guidance when they're promoted, and he started mentoring others at some point and was seeing some of the common issues managers were facing were related to dealing with their people. He also shared during COVID, he stopped watching the news because he wasn't sure who was telling the truth anymore. That led us to a discussion on integrity. The foundation of effective leadership is integrity. And Jim shared the story of the borough administrator who gave him the advice, ask yourself every night, did I do anything today for my benefit that was at the expense of someone else? Integrity leads to trust, commitment, focus, and retention. To build integrity, you can journal, listen to your people, and take notes. CEOs aren't necessarily role models, but they are easy to find references to help us connect the dots in some of these topics. Then we switched over to empathy, and empathy is a good topic, right? We kind of acknowledge it's a little enigmatic, but it's a great thing to be discussing. So in essence, it's putting yourself in the shoes of your employee, understanding, and then helping them solve a problem. Ask yourself, what would I want to have in this happen in this situation? It's a challenging skill to develop. People are generally afraid to say the wrong thing. First, listen. You can ask yourself, where have you seen empathy being shown in action, and then model that. And the very last thing Jim talked about as far as what he'd learned recently was people right now need to hear it's going to be okay. So there you have it, folks. There's your episode recap. Jim Carlough talking about empathy and other topics. Thanks for sticking around. Remember to comment if you want that free book. Until next time, everybody take care.